Redistricting Advisory Committee meeting of January 27th, 2022. I'm Paul Gator, I'm the Vice Chair of this committee. Our committee chair, Maureen Holt, is unable to attend this evening, so I will be chairing the meeting. So I'll start with the roll call of the committee. Obviously, committee chair Holt is not with us. Committee member Bogner.
Present.
Committee member Malla.
Present.
Committee member Claudia Marshall.
Present.
Committee member Phil Marshall.
Present.
And committee member Settles.
Present.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'm going to turn the meeting for now over to Jessica and to Shalise from NDC.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gator, and good evening, committee members and members of the public. I wanted to briefly summarize what has occurred since our last committee meeting and where we're at in the process now. So last Wednesday night, the City Council held its first map review public hearing. I know a majority of you were able to attend. So Chair Holt and Vice Chair Gator and Shalise did a fabulous job of presenting the committee's work to date and going over the focus maps. We received a number of public comments, and then the council asked questions and deliberated and eventually voted to move forward with the focus map 504C. And so the next step in the council's process will be that on February 15th, staff will bring forward an ordinance for adoption of map 504C. We're holding this meeting tonight in the interest of transparency and public input, as the committee's meeting schedule has been on the calendar for months now since the beginning of the process. And we do want to try and get as much public input as possible. So the goal for tonight is Shalise will present on map 504C and a little bit more on the map side of where we're at in the process. And then we will have an opportunity for public input, and then also wanted to provide the committee an opportunity to finalize its recommendation to the City Council for that report on February 15th. And so I would turn it over to Shalise, but Committee Member Mahler, I see your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, I just Committee Member Bogner, I guess, is dialed in, but Hal, can you mute your speaker somehow, please?
I think I can do that.
There you go. Okay. All right, so I will turn it over to Shalise. Shalise, you're muted.
How's that? Okay, I'm going to quickly use the same familiar slides that you're familiar with, but that's important because we have people who are new to the process, who are just coming on board and becoming involved, and want to make sure that everyone has the same understanding of some of the parameters that we must follow when we're drawing these maps. Here's where we've been. Main draft map public hearings have been held on November 8th and December 16th by this committee, as well as the City Council meeting that was just held that Jessica had just mentioned. The next steps would be the February 15th hearing. At that point, the council would introduce a resolution, or an ordinance to adopt the map. This is just a highlight of some of the main communities of interest that we've heard discussed throughout the process. It's certainly not an exhaustive list or a complete list. And that is, I believe, one of our goals today is for the commission to further refine some of the communities of interest that were taken into consideration with its MAPS recommendations, so that the council is very clear on the thought process that the committee used in identifying the focus maps. This slide is of importance because these are the laws that we must follow. The federal law, simple, equal population, that's a no-brainer. We must have equal population or near equal population, no more than a 10% deviation. Each of the draft maps, the focus maps that the committee recommended, of course, met those guidelines, and no racial gerrymandering, meaning we can't draw lines based solely on race, and we can't draw lines that would dilute the voting strength of a protected class. I want to call your attention, particularly for tonight's discussion, on this second column. These are the criteria that's outlined in the Fair Maps Act. One thing that is not evident on this slide is that these are in ranked order. So they're given priority to priority number 1, which is geographically contiguous. Geographically contiguous is meaning that there's one solid border for each of the districts. And if there is a point where it just meets at corners, then it's not contiguous. It does not, it's not defined as being geographically adjacent or geographically aligned. Geographically contiguous has a very specific definition in the election code. And that means that if it has to have one single border and points that just meet at a corner are not contiguous. None of the maps have issues with being geographically contiguous. All of the focus maps are to meet that criteria. That's the number 1 criteria. The second ranked criteria is undivided neighborhoods and communities of interest. So those are socioeconomic geographical areas that should be kept together. And that is the second priority when we're looking to draw these maps. The third priority after 1 and 2 are met, easily identifiable boundaries. And the fourth is compactness, meaning you don't bypass one group to get to a more distant. All of these have the criterion of if it's practicable to do so. So I just wanted to clarify that those are in ranked order. So that's why we've been giving so much emphasis to communities of interest. And then after we've met the criterion, we can look at other things, such as minimizing those voters that are shifted to different election years. Of course, the middle column has priority over that. Respecting voters' choices and continuity in office, that typically refers to not pairing incumbents, future population growth, and preserving the core of the existing districts. Now the maps, this is our current districts as they're laid out. We are not population balanced. We cannot adopt in its present state. Otherwise, the map does meet, in NDC's opinion, from the discussions that we've held so far, it would otherwise have met the Fair Maps Act criterion. We are 16.42% out of deviation, meaning that we need to, there are more people in District 4 than there are in other areas of the map. So moving about 200 people out of District 4 into Districts 2 and 3 achieves a population balance. The council preferred map 504C, which is one of the four focus maps were identified by the commission. Tonight's discussion will mostly focus around 504C. I did want to keep these in the power slide in the PowerPoint in case there's desire for the committee or the public to refer to any of the other statistics on any of the other maps which are presented here. And what you're seeing in the fourth column over is the maximum Latino citizen voting age population. We do not have a geographically concentrated area enough to reach even near majority of a district that would have a 50% or plus Latino citizen voting age population. Nor do we have any districts that would meet a 50% non-white, or we call it majority minority district. So the highest that we're seeing is for a 5-district plan would be 38%. For the benefit of those who are just new to the process, the committee did make a clear recommendation of its preference for a 5-district plan that would have 5 directly elected or 5 elected council members with a rotating mayor over the 4-district plan. What you're seeing here is the preferred map 504C, and this will be the basis of our discussion for today. It does meet all the legal criteria discussed of the Fair Maps Act, and it does have a population deviation under the 10% is 7.32%. Maximum Latino citizen voting age population of 26.5, and the majority minority district about 35%. Do have the other maps loaded as we did in the past, in case you want to visit those, as well as all the maps in snapshot view, if you would like to see those as well. For the elections sequencing, districts 1, 4, and 5 would be up in 2022 if we went with a 5-district plan. If it's a 4-district plan, it would be just districts 1 and 4 and the mayor. And then election year 2024, the districts 2 and 3. There was discussion about voter deferral. That means the amount of voters that would be switched from a 2022 cycle to a 2024 cycle. And again, that's not one of the prioritized criteria of the Fair Maps Act, but if all the other criteria is met, that could be a consideration. I do have the ability to jump back and forth to the interactive review map. In fact, I would like to just show that because I think it's a good place for us to keep up on the screen. Screen bigger here for you. The interactive review map allows us to zoom in very closely to different areas on the screen. If my cursor's working this time. I'm stuck here just a second. Oh, I'm sorry. It was slow to catch up with me. Now I've gone too far. Also, I can show you the geography of the census blocks. This is something that the committee is well versed on. We have some very odd shaped census block geography. The law requires that we follow that census block geography when we are drawing the boundaries. So just for example, we can see the light gray outlines, that would be a complete census block, and that census block cannot be split. It makes it for a very frustrating map drawing at times when the census blocks are very odd shaped and very large. So for example, here's 493 in this very large shaped census block. 9183. Just wanted to let you know that that's available. Should the committee or any of the commissioners want to look at that geography. Let me go ahead and switch off on this, take the census block off so we can just see the maps. In addition to the maps, I'm able to change the base layer and look at the satellite images, just like you would on a Google map, look at the street images or satellite images. And with that, Chair Gator, Vice Chair Gator, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions and we can turn it over to the committee for discussion. I think, Jessica, you had an outline for when we'll be taking public comment and what the next steps would be.
Yeah, so Vice Chair Gator can take it from here. We discussed taking public comment at this portion of the meeting and then jumping into our second agenda item of committee discussion. So.
Yeah, I think if the committee members have any questions for Shalise, then perhaps you can hold them and we'll go through the public comment first and then put all that together. So I'm going to open up the meeting for public comment. Jessica is going to guide me on how many people we have who want to speak. So please raise your hands in the function on Zoom that enables you to do that. I want to emphasize that this is the public comment section of the agenda. If you want to say something to us, this is your opportunity to do so. There won't be another one in this meeting. I'd also like to add that we've received, I think it's now 8 emails from members of the public regarding this meeting. They will all be part of the record of this meeting and will also be included in the staff report that will go to the City Council meeting in February. So there's a lot of points that are made in some of those emails, and I'd like to ask anybody who speaks to try to be concise, especially if you've already sent us an email about this. So with that, Jessica, I'll let you call the members of the public who want to speak.
Thanks. We have 2 hands raised so far, and so I will call first on Tom Devine.
Thank you. I have sent an email with my comments, so I'll keep this very short. First, I want to thank the committee for all its work. I have looked at the last couple of maps that were the favored ones, 504C and 503B, and I see no way to rationally make a choice between them. In my opinion, it's ridiculous in the first place to divide such a small city as Half Moon Bay into districts. I think it's counterproductive. It reduces the options for representatives for each of the districts because it requires the representative to be a resident of that district. I would support moving back to at-large elections for all city council seats. I also believe that if we can't avoid district elections, a mayor elected at large by the whole city would ensure a better representation of the general will of citizens. Thirdly, I am a resident of the Kenyatta Cove area, and I am not going to be able to vote in the upcoming election. I will not be able to vote until 2024. I last voted in 2018 for a city election. I believe this is not fair to the residents of my neighborhood, and I am hoping that the council and if the committee has any input on that, the committee would consider this as a burden on the residents of Kenyatta Cove neighborhood. And I would also like to say that I think one possible solution would be to require all representatives of the new districts to be up for election in the next election, as opposed to only having some of the districts hold elections. Since the districts are changing, I don't believe that's a fair representation of the will of the voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Next, we have Jan Hansen.
Hello, my name is Jan Hansen. I've lived in Kenyatta Cove for 7 years, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of myself and not for any other person or group. I have sent written comments, and I hope you've had an opportunity to review my more detailed comments. I think you've done a tremendous job of undertaking a very difficult task and trying to balance all the competing interests and criteria. For reasons stated below, I would ask you to reconsider your previous recommendation and instead recommend map 503B to the council. 3 main points. 503B contains more seniors. It best meets the criteria, and it allows Kenyatta Cove to vote as scheduled. First point there. Map 503B, which would keep Kenyatta Cove in District 4 with Ocean Colony, best achieves the objectives of creating a community of interest with a large concentration of seniors, as well as better meeting the other criteria. Staying with Ocean Colony would create a district with 7% more seniors than map 504C, which would separate Kenyatta Cove from Ocean Colony. And all my statistics tonight have come from the demographics provided by NDC. Seniors over 60 in map 503B are 41%, 503B are 41% of the voting age population, as opposed to 34% in map 504C. Second point, map 503B better meets the criteria of compactness and would recognize Kenyatta Cove and Ocean Colony as geographically contiguous. Its boundaries would be easily identifiable and understandable by residents, which is another of the mapping criteria. Also, it would not raise any question of gerrymandering, which I think map 506C does. This, a similar map was considered 2 years ago, and gerrymandering was an issue then. I understand NDC does not believe this would consist of gerrymandering, but I would suggest that we ask the city attorney to give us her opinion on that issue. Kenyatta Cove would stay in the same district with its closest geographical neighbor, Ocean Colony, with whom it shares important emergency preparedness measures, as well as many other characteristics, excuse me, such as private home ownership, favorite trails to the beach, South End road and utility infrastructure improvements, as well as many friendships and social connections. Third point, as previously scheduled, Kenyatta Cove would vote this year, 2022, for its council representative, either to re-elect the incumbent or to elect a new representative from District 4. We would not be required to wait 2 years more after being moved into a district 2 miles up the road where we did not vote for the incumbent and where the incumbent has 2 years to remain on his term. Adding 2 years to the already 4 years is a 50% increase in the normal wait between council district elections. And this would result in a 6-year hiatus since we last voted in 2018. Especially for seniors, that's a long time to wait. If Kenyatta Cove is denied the vote in 2022, the approximately 600 of us in Kenyatta Cove would represent a significant 6.5% of the total Half Moon Bay voting age population. And if you look at the registered voters as of 2020, the Kenyatta Cove group of about 600 would represent about 7.4%. That is not a rounding error or an oopsie. I would say that a deferred vote is a denied vote, especially in the case of seniors. In conclusion, I would point out that nearly every comment that I've heard in most of the meetings that I've participated in have opposed separating Kenyatta Cove from Ocean Colony, or did not state any particular preference for map 504C. As I recall, only one commenter from Ocean Colony made such a suggestion, but even later at the council meeting last week, he acknowledged that Kenyatta Cove and Ocean Colony have more in common than not in common. I want to thank you for your consideration, and I would urge you to continue discussions about your decision and to reconsider your recommendation and recommend map 503B to the council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Next, we have David Oblovi.
Thanks, Jessica. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I'm going to go back in time a little bit to Monday, April 5th last year, when I wrote an email to the entire city council. I'm not going to read the whole thing, thankfully, but I am going to read one line that I think is relevant to what's happening tonight. And the line says, "Not surprisingly, staff is advising that you do it the same way you did last time." This is referencing redistricting when the city council created their own districts. What they failed to state is obvious, blah, blah, blah. Drawing districts that you yourself will occupy is corrupt. I fought incredibly hard to get this commission into existence, not so that I could manipulate a process or that anyone could manipulate a process, but in fact to do exactly the opposite, which was to ensure that the map that you created and eventually recommended to the city council, and that hopefully the city council would be wise enough to accept and approve, was free of personal interests. And the commonality that you're seeing in all the people speaking to this topic tonight, and at your last meeting and at the last city council meeting, is one of personal interest. They continually ignore basic laws, as far as that Shalice was kind enough to go over for us, regarding you can't make any recommendations to the city council at this point that are going to change the outcome, because the council has already sent your map to the February 15th meeting for approval or disapproval. All of which is to say, I was hopelessly impressed by each and every one of you and the work you did here. I entered into this process as a spectator, very cynically, expecting, as frequently turns out in this community, not much from the political process. And up until the past week, you guys carried the day, and it's now going to be up to you to carry it again over the finish. And the way you do that is by honoring all the work you've done, putting aside personal interests, focusing on what is proper or right for the community, and then bringing that to the council. So with that said, that'll be my last comment on redistricting. Thank God. I want to thank each and every one of you. Like I said, some of us have history, some of us don't, but I was impressed by literally every one of you, and I'm grateful for the time and serious approach you took to this work.
Thank you, David. Next, we have Joyce Logan.
Hi, my name's Joyce Logan. I live in Kenyatta Cove. I would support all those things that Jan Hansen has shared with you, so I won't repeat them, but I'd like to add a couple of observations from my perspective. When I look at the map for the new District 3, it brings to mind something that we used to do as a child. We would take a Campbell's soup can, or two actually, and put a hole in the bottom of an empty can and tie a long cotton string between them. And then we would go as far apart as we could and try to talk to each other. I don't know if any of you are old enough to have experienced that Midwestern joy, but that is what that district looks like to me. And I do not see how that can stand the test of compactness nor contiguousness. It just does not feel that that is a possibility. Another concept is there are seniors everywhere in our community, not just in Kenyatta Cove and not just in the senior campus. And I'm uncomfortable with the concept that there would be one city council member charged with protecting the seniors in our community. I do not find that an acceptable situation for myself. And I have to speak for myself on these kinds of things. Another issue is Kenyatta Cove seniors are homeowners. That is a significant difference from the population of the senior campus. So I think putting those two together as being a same group is not an appropriate way to think about these two separate communities. There are some similar concerns and needs for sure, but there are also many other and different concerns and needs between these two groups. And finally, as far as creating a super senior district, I believe that every city council member is and should carry consideration of senior population in our community at the heart of all deliberations.
Thank you, Joyce. Vice Chair Gator, that concludes public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to all the people who've spoken, and again to folks who emailed us about this meeting. So the meeting is now open for committee to discuss and ask questions.
Paul?
Just one second. I have a question myself for Shalice from one of the comments that came up. So I wonder if we can maybe just take questions that we have in our minds for clarification on what we've heard before we move on to the more substantive issue of finalising our recommendation. Steve, you got your hand up.
This is Hal. I don't have a hand from the phone, I think. So I'd like to also get a turn.
Okay, I'll take Steve first and then you, Hal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. The most significant thing I heard in the public comments and saw in the emails that went around is the issue of when people would be eligible, when their districts would be eligible to vote. And that was something that I don't think I was aware of, or certainly didn't understand the specifics of the mechanics of. And I'd like to say that I think that's something which should be addressed. I don't know how that could be done. That's obviously a matter of politics and procedure and legal issues. But basically having some of these people not be able to vote, for 6 years for their city council is a significant issue that I'd like to make sure we have at least. Like I said, this is my first awareness of it.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Jessica, do you want to take that now?
I'd actually refer that question to Shalice.
Okay.
Yes, it's definitely a consideration with every jurisdiction that is going through redistricting, and most every jurisdiction has citizens that experience voter deferral. The only way to avoid it is one, to keep your existing map, which we can't do, or to make population changes between those districts that share the same election cycles, which is difficult to do because of the configuration of Half Moon Bay. It's also interesting that the Fair Maps Act, in its prioritized criteria, did not list that as a priority. As NDC, we know that that's important. That's why we did list it on the traditional principles to be considered after the criteria is met. So clearly the state's focus is on those 4 contiguousness communities of interest, easily identifiable boundaries, and compactness.
Thanks. My understanding is that this is not necessarily within our remit. Our job was to propose maps, and it was up to the city council then to consider how the election process would run in the future. And that was a point that they didn't get to in the meeting last week.
And Vice Chair Gator, I'm sorry, I did want to address one of the speaker's suggestions that each of the seats be up for election at the same time to avoid this voter deferral, but the law specifically does not allow that. So each of the none of the current terms can be cut short. So that is not a prerogative of the city council. We've seen few exceptions where there's been a court order that's happened. I know maybe 1 or 2 cases that I'm aware of, but that's after there's been a lawsuit and the court has intervened. But it's not possible for the council's does not have the authority to cut anyone's term short and have all of these seats be up for election at the same time.
If I could.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. Steve,
can we get back in order a little bit?
Well, I think Steve wants to follow up on that, and then it's you, Hal.
Yeah, I would just like to, as a point of information, I'm disappointed, and I don't know if this is NDC or who this is, that the issue of deferment, as it specifically relates to Kenyatta Cove, apparently is because, I guess, of changing around their configuration, that this had that impact on them. And I feel like had we known that information, we might have made an effort to act differently. Personally, I think I definitely would have, because I think, in the effort to try to balance things, had we understood that we were also taking away 2 years worth of their effective representation, that's, to me, feels unacceptable.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And now Hal.
So first of all, I really appreciated that we got 8 letters today. And it feels like more public participation thanks to the light that's been shined on this process by the city council meeting, than we'd obtained, in earlier meetings. So that part I'm very pleased with. I was, personally somewhat surprised at the lack of the policy discussion at the council meeting, because it's not, as you said, Paul, the role of this committee to make any policy judgments, nor to make any decisions. The decisions belong to the council. And, it was our responsibility to try to figure out how to adjust the lines for both 4-district and 5-district choices based on the law, the census data, and NDC's guidance. And, we recommended to the council, one thing over another, but we provided both in the 4 and 5-district maps the alternatives of connecting Kenyatta Cove to downtown and not connecting Kenyatta Cove to downtown. I had personally expected, and I don't know if the council might return to this, obviously it's far outside of our control, but if the council returns to the questions and wishes to go back to the track of holding, the 2 public workshop meetings that I believe were intended in the original schedule for further discussion with the public and tweaking or discussing further the choices before the council makes its final determination. I'm certainly willing, and I imagine all of us are willing to, continue to give time to participate and assist in getting the comments out and getting things thought through in terms of conformance. With respect to the outcry from Kenyatta Cove residents, personally, and none of us speak on behalf of the committee, we each speak personally, and it's outside of the committee's really, power to decide questions of disenfranchisement and things like that. But I agree, it really feels like a disenfranchisement, but I think the entire process is one which, I would hope the city council, revisits wider alternatives as well as the districting possibilities, because they're not restricted from the agreement made in the past from changing their approach to elections back or to some third thing. And I personally, I think every member of the committee at one time or another, has raised some thought that went outside just the question of technically how do we move a line to bring it in conformance with the new census data. That being said, I also did want to correct one thing which I think might have been mentioned in the city council meeting or in our earlier meeting, which was in my reading of the survey responses that were received by the city on the question of 4 districts or 5 and a rotating mayor of 2 years or 4 years. There were 62 comments that were transcribed by staff and distributed to us. And as I read the 62 comments, 22 of them read to me as supporting a return to at-large elections. And I think that in fairness, the city council, should hear that information as well, because when it comes to the question of, the impact of any one particular voter on the voting for city council, we've effectively, because of the threat that came to the city and the choice of districting, changed everybody from being able to have a voice heard by 2 or 3 people standing for election every 2 years into everybody being able to have one council member who hears their voice as a voter once every 4 years, and the other 4 not hear any voice whatsoever. So, to me, I would I would hope that the council perhaps asks us to participate in a wider ranging workshop where they can ask questions about the possibilities that we're in a position to help with, and also foster public discussion, on all these wider issues. I've seen previous joint workshops between the city council and other commissions in the past in the city, and I would certainly be pleased to participate in such a thing if the council wants to open this back up. And my last comment is, I don't think that it's a correct understanding. The one comment from a member of the public today that this group controls any decisions, and it's not for us to say things should be done as they're being done or decided as the council's indicated already, or that they shouldn't. So it's not something we control at all. And there was one other thing. One public comment at the council meeting raised a question that wasn't answered there, which was somebody who lived, I think, on the south side of Kehoe Avenue, asked how it was that the houses on his side of his street were not part of the district line drawn around his neighborhood. And the reason for that is because the way the census blocks are defined, and the city council wasn't in a position to realize and answer that question. But the census blocks basically outline the cores of neighborhoods and then leave the perimeters sometimes in a big catch-all outside of those neighborhoods. So in case Mr. Benjamin was listening, that was his answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Hal. Okay, I've got Claudia, and then Michael, and then Phil. Sorry, Claudia, you're on mute.
There.
Yep.
So my understanding when I looked at one of the maps that Shalice was showing was that 1, 3, and 5 would be available for voting in 22. And if I'm incorrect on that, would you please clarify?
I believe it's 1, 4, and 5.
Oh, 1, 4, and 5. So, but 1 is basically the Kenyatta Cove and the extension down Main Street. Is that not correct?
That's 3.
It depends on the map you're looking at. But on 504C, that would be District 3.
Oh,
if I could add,
I'm looking at 504B. I'm sorry.
and Claudia, if I can add, and this kind of touches on committee member Mahler's comments as well, and someone from the public. So districts 2, and when the city transitioned to district elections in 2018, we had just completed the election where we elected 3 council members at large. It's 3 on one election, 2 on the next. And so the first district election of 2020 was districts 2 and 3. So we currently right now on the city council have 2 district council members and 3 at-large council members. This November's election will complete however it looks based on the map adopted, will complete the cycle to where we will have either the 4 district members or the 5 district council members. So there were a couple comments on one, the deferral. That was because District 3 had just elected its representative in 2020. So the District 3 would not elect again until 24. And then also a concern that whether all 5 should be elected, we would complete the cycle to where we would have a balance of district elected council members. So I just wanted to add that context.
So it is, to clarify, does that mean that Kenyatta Cove would not be deferred for 6 years?
No, I'm sorry, they would. I was explaining why. If map 504C is ultimately adopted by the city council, District 3 would not vote again until 2024. In the map that was adopted in 2018, Kenyatta Cove was in District 4. So that's where the 6-year deferral comes from.
I see. I understand. Okay, thank you. The other thing that I would like to comment upon is that I know there are over 360 households in Kenyatta Cove. And as one of the public speakers said, that there were 600 people. But it also seems to me that when that part of the community was part of the Ocean Colony group, that their voice was being diluted because the Ocean Colony and North groups were so much more populated. And so I'm just having a little hard time understanding why they feel that specific group of 600 people, and we've heard now from 4 or 5 people from that community, not from 100 or 200, that they feel as if they were being misrepresented. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Claudia. Michael?
Thank you, Vice Chair and members of the public. First of all, I really want to thank those that submitted letters. Really appreciate those written comments. And then those that spoke tonight. I too am concerned about the issue of the vote. The idea that, and Shalise, I understand what you were telling us, that there is a law that, and what is that law? Is that a state law? Is that a federal law that would do this vote deferral?
Yes, it's a state law.
State law. Okay, thank you very much. So I am concerned about that. And I guess my concern drives me to want to have some discussion or understanding as it relates to, based on this being a state law, of what can be done to, help the people that are going to be put into abeyance. I mean, do they have any recourse, or is it a situation where this is kind of the situation they find themselves in and they just have to wait it out? And I know you did say, Shirley, that there were other occasions where you did see that there were a few occasions where certain circumstances, resulted in whatever. But do they have any recall, any way to, deal with this idea of 6 years?
Other than a different map being adopted that would not place them in a different election cycle. No.
Okay.
And the case that I spoke of, the one case I spoke of was related to something entirely different, not redistricting. It was related to actually transitioning from at-large to a by district system.
Okay. And then my other last question is that the only, based on the map that we did recommend unanimously to the board, is there any other community that we might not have heard of that will also be impacted by this, or is it just that community?
It would take some deeper analysis to know how many others would be affected, but there will likely be others as well. Okay.
My suggestion is that the board, when they do their deliberations, that they are aware of that. So therefore, when the decision is made, there's real clarity around impacted people, and especially if you're talking about numbers like 6 years, that would be something that I would suggest we pass on to them as they do their further deliberations. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Michael.
Can I raise one point regarding the statement about unanimous recommendation, if I may? We unanimously recommended 504B, I believe it was, as the choice if Kenyatta Cove and Main Street were to be joined. But we equally were responsible to give the council an alternative choice that didn't. And that one was not unanimous. That was a 4-2 vote, to offer the particular other map that we did. So I wouldn't say that, necessarily we unanimously said that they should be connected rather than not connected. That's a policy decision for the council. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear to the public.
I think also how the council made a decision to move ahead with this option.
Yes, it's their decision.
Thanks. Phil.
Yeah, I have a few comments. First on this issue of deferring votes and election sequencing. Just to come back to what Michael was saying, I think it's worth noting that at the beginning of this, Shalish said something like, what we have to do is effectively move 200 residents from District 4 to District 3, given the census changes. But it turns out that the large census blocks that we have to work with when drawing maps, and the need to keep communities of interest together, and in particular moving from 4 districts to 4 to 5 districts, I think that meant in practice that there was always going to be a group of a few hundred residents, more than 200, who were going to suffer deferment. And so the question is really, which few hundred. And so we're hearing from the particular community that have been affected by the chosen map, but there would be a different group of a similar size, I think, if the map had been different. So just a comment on that. In terms of Michael's point about recourse by the citizens, it occurs to me that we've talked a lot about disenfranchisement, not getting to vote, but disenfranchisement is more than just about getting to choose your representative. It's about being represented effectively by them. And I think in our deliberations, when we came out in favor of connecting Cañada Cove and South Main, it was more thinking in terms of what challenges are those residents going to face? What do they have in common? How do we think they should be represented in practice? And so we didn't discuss much this issue of choosing representatives, but we're more focused on how will they be represented? How will their voices be heard in practice by the council member in question? So to come back to the question of, what recourse they have, it would seem appropriate for the current District 3 council member to, with the new map that they've been presented with, to make some particular effort in outreach to the residents of Cañada Cove that have now appeared in his district, in order to make sure that he understands the issues that they face and can represent them properly. So even though they wouldn't get to vote in 2022, it would seem like a very good idea for them to, establish the relationship with their new council member, even though they didn't choose them at the ballot box. There's a new relationship to build there, I think. I did have a question for Shalice just on sort of more technical, I suppose, but somebody from the public mentioned gerrymandering. And, I know the city is going to be worried about, potential legal challenges, I'm sure. So can you just say a little bit more about why it is you view the chosen map 504C as not being a gerrymander, and even though it's not as compact, it's still a valid and defensible map? I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
We believe that NDC is legally defensible, largely because it was drawn based on the communities of interest, which is the second highest priority. It definitely meets the geographically contiguous. That's an easy check off. And then largely that district was drawn based on communities of interest. And just as you had stated, how best to represent those communities and which other communities would Cañada Cove best align with as far as representation. So, and that is the second priority given. And then easily identifiable boundaries, definitely has easily identifiable boundaries. The contiguousness is defined as not bypassing one neighborhood to reach a more distant group. And it's been clearly stated throughout the testimony, throughout the discussion of the council, that there is clearly a divider between the east side of Highway 1 and the west side of Highway 1 as far as the types of housing, the types of communities on either side of Highway 1. That community is contiguous, contiguously follows from South Main all the way down, picks up not very many residents in the strip, but then when we get down lower into the existing map, and then past Miramontes Point, I believe is the Miramontes Point Road, then it continues to pick up the rest of the neighborhood. So yeah, we don't see an issue with it meeting any of the criteria, and believe that the proper emphasis has been on the ranked prioritized criteria as outlined in the Fair Maps Act.
Okay, thank you. I did have one more, Paul, if I may. I promise you it's the last one.
Go ahead.
I thought there was another interesting comment from the public about it not being necessarily a good idea to put all seniors in one district. And I think there's some truth in that, because in our city council, given its rules, it's actually quite important to have two city council members looking out for a general class, because of the way there's a rule about putting things on the agenda if you have two council members in support. So actually having the broader senior community represented in two districts is a good idea. The question is, I think, whether the residents of Cañada Cove have more in common or have similar challenges to the seniors in District 3 compared to District 4. And I think that's more or less where we ended up thinking. So in the current map, there would be a strong senior community still in Ocean Colony, but with different demographics, different challenges, and so on. But when it came to general issues that faced by senior citizens, then there would be two districts that had those two sort of voting blocks in them. With Ocean Colony, I thought it was interesting that the emphasis at the city council meeting on the public survey, and while in the end they concluded that it wasn't representative of all communities of interest in the city. That is, nobody mentioned the Latino community. There was very few responses from Cañada Cove, I believe, but there were quite a lot of responses from Ocean Colony. And we haven't heard very much from them at all in this whole conversation about which neighborhoods belong with which in which district. And so just as a suggestion for the final report, it might be interesting to go back to those responses and just look at how many of the Ocean Colony responders put emphasis on being connected to Cañada Cove. My recollection was that their priority on the whole was that Ocean Colony should be kept together and treated as a single community of interest. I think there were some comments that related to Ocean Colony belonging with Cañada Cove somehow, but I don't think there were very many. But just as a suggestion for the final report, it might be good to draw that out as being a final useful thing to take from the public survey.
Thank you, Phil. I actually had a question about gerrymandering too, which Shalise largely answered, but one of the members of the public who brought this up asked if the city attorney could weigh in on this. Is that something that can be done or has been done?
The city attorney will be at the February 15th city council meeting, and if the question comes out during that public hearing, she can certainly answer it. Shalise, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
I don't. Yeah, I think that leaving that up to your legal counsel to advise. I know that there are definitely legal definitions of political gerrymandering, and that's where lines are drawn to pick voters, and that certainly is not the case here with the way that the lines are drawn based on communities of interest.
Okay. I don't really have much to add to what's already been said, except I share the concern of several other committee members about the consequence of our recommended map is that residents of Kenyatta Cove won't vote until 2024. But I think Phil makes a good point that somebody was going to be affected by this change in terms of having their vote deferred. So that's kind of an inevitable consequence of the process that we went through and the recommendation that we made. Jessica, were you waving at me, or was that just?
Yeah, I was raising my hand. One of the committee members asked if there were any other neighborhoods that were affected.
Oh, yeah.
And I did a quick side-by-side comparison, and the western portion of Alsace-Lorraine will also have a 6-year voter deferral. And then on the other hand, there is a large portion of the downtown and Arleta Park neighborhood, in addition to a majority of the Miramar neighborhood, that will vote in back-to-back elections. So there may be more, but when I did a side-by-side comparison, those were the glaring differences.
So those people would be voting twice in 2 years.
They voted in 2020, and they would be voting again under the current focus map in 24. Yes.
Okay.
22.
Yeah, voter acceleration is the term for those that vote in back-to-back. So voter accelerated and voter deferrals.
Okay. So the purpose of this meeting was the goal of this meeting, after hearing the public comment, was to finalize our recommendation formally to go back to City Council on February 15th. Given all that's been said, I think it's important that we consider and state that we stand by the recommendation that we made, given the decision that the council made, or not. So I think it'd be important to get the committee to weigh in on that before we move into the final finalization of the report process. Steve.
I'd like to once again thank my brilliant and very experienced colleague here, Mr. Marshall, for his comments regarding, and I mean that in all seriousness, setting my mind at ease with respect to representation in voting and what that means, because there are essentially two issues where we have repercussions. One is representation, and the other is sort of the dynamic nature of politics, which is the voting booth. And I think voting takes place, every so often, but representation takes place on hopefully a consistent basis. And I think as long as people are assured that their representation will be sincere and every bit as considered as, basically as people that they didn't, these are people who didn't vote for their representatives, I think is what another issue that we're going to have, is that people will be moved and their representatives will not be the people that they voted for. But the important thing is that those representatives do represent them. And so I think that's beyond our purview here. But I think it came as a bit of a shock, certainly to me, and I think to a lot of other people, that was a repercussion of our recommendation. But I think that can be addressed by the city council and by outreach of each one of the representatives.
Okay, thanks. Claudia?
I totally agree with what Steve just said. And it also, I would like to add that whatever recommendation we would have come to consensus for the board, or for the council rather, this situation would have been the same. Some group would have deferred voting, some would have accelerated voting within the new districts. Even if we had gone to a 4-district and balanced the population as we were required to do. So with that in mind, I also agree that, it's very unfortunate we were not aware of that aspect of this process in the beginning, but it is what it is.
Okay, thank you, Claudia.
I might have one more
Yep, go
comment.
ahead, Hal. Yep, sure.
So first of all, there's several months built into the process. So if the council does wish us to come back and take into consideration anything new, I imagine they could. The council made its decision a number of years ago, in the agreement with whatever attorney came to them, to go to district elections. So to the extent that they have to choose how the districts work, we've done our best, and they have the decisions to make. But the legalistic question of, are there any ways to, not have some people voting, deferred for, a 6-year gap in their being able to vote. The council is equally free to return to at-large or to seek another system. And that's outside the purview of this committee. But I would hope that they hear and discuss that personally. That's not a thing for our committee to be weighing in on. This is a new issue, the question of Kenyatta Cove becoming, put out for 6 years. Well, I also wanted to point out one other thing, which is if the council members really wish to make sure everybody is saved that risk, the 2 council members who were elected last time could easily vacate their seats, not that I would urge them to do so, and make it possible in 2022 for all 5 districts to vote. Some for 2 years, some for 4, obviously. That would be lawful too, but it's not anything that anyone could be compelled to do. Okay, I'm afraid I had not expected that we were going to have a new task tonight and that this would be a shorter meeting. So I have a second obligation here, and I'm going to have to sign off in a minute or two. So I wanted to thank all of the fellow members of the committee. You guys are all amazing, and it's been a real privilege to be able to participate and learn so much about the process. And I think we did our best, but carrying out an errand which is a lot of limitations in it. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Hal.
And thank you, Jessica and Shalice.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. Thanks for all the input that you provided to the committee over the last few months. Michael or Phil, do you have anything else?
Glad to do it.
Sure. Do you have anything else you want to contribute to this discussion? Want to move on?
This is Michael. No, I have no other comments.
Okay.
I appreciate the dialogue. I appreciate the comments that people have brought forward, but I have no additional comments.
Okay, thank you. Phil?
I have no additional comments on this topic. I do have some things for final input to the final report, but they're on different topics.
Okay, then that's where we'll go next. Then, Jessica, do you want to just make sure we're all on the same page of what we need to do in order to get this back to the council for February 15th?
Yeah, sure. So part of the committee's bylaws include that the committee shall submit a final report to the city council with its recommendations. And at the last meeting, we did include a summary of, the process to date and much of the committee's thought process behind the focus maps that we arrived at. And Chair Holt and Vice Chair Gator also gave a presentation to the city council. But in the ordinance adoption staff report, we want to make sure that the record is complete. And so essentially what we're looking for is any, final thoughts that the committee wants included with what was included previously, and, the thought process behind the communities of interest that the committee found most important. And so I think just summarizing that, and, I believe you've all read that council staff report. So if there was anything missing from it that you think is important from the committee's perspective to be included, then please let us know about that as well.
May I ask if committee members can submit, written comments, in regards to that to include?
Yeah, certainly have.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Thanks. On that note, I'll thank you again. Good evening.
Okay. I would like to suggest that maybe we can form a subcommittee to actually work with Jessica to make sure that comments and issues that we've surfaced as a committee can get into the staff report. And that subcommittee could be myself and Marin plus one committee member. It may make things more efficient than having each of us pile stuff onto staff for staff to compile. It's a suggestion. I see Claudia's hand up and Phil.
I'd be willing to, but I'm sure any of you will do well.
Claudia, do you want to say something?
Yes, I think Phil would be a perfect match with you and Marin on that subcommittee. I just want to make sure that we include in our recommendation that the council take a long look at including Moon Ridge within the process.
Yeah. Something that's come up many times in our conversations, I know, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Phil.
I was going to say the same thing as Claudia. I mean, I have a few things that I'd like to air at this meeting. I think the subcommittee idea is good, and I would be very happy to work with Chair Holt and Vice Chair Gator on that if the committee was willing. Particular things that I think is worth saying tonight, if we're ready to dive into that. Then
I think it'd be good, Phil, to hear some of the things that are in our minds that we all hear rather than reading it in a document at some point in the next few weeks. Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay, so I agree with Claudia. We ought to say something about Moon Ridge because it did come up at a couple of meetings, and at the time we noted that it was something that we ought to comment on. And I'm not sure we can do much more than repeat our observations of how it would make sense for Moon Ridge to be incorporated into the city for the purposes of representation of the residents there. But perhaps we could express it in terms of a hope that the city and county will explore that before the next census. So I agree with Claudia that that's important to include. On a related note, one thing that was missing from the staff report and also missing from Shalice's slides at the start of this meeting was that we did quite clearly establish the Latino community in Half Moon Bay as a community of interest, as well as a federally protected class. And I do think we need to acknowledge that in our report. We can comment that we determined it's not possible to draw a district with more than 50% citizens of voting age that are Hispanic. And so the Latino population is somehow unavoidably cracked between the districts. But it's true that we took the dilution of their representation into account when we were selecting focus maps. And I think that's important for our Latino neighbors to read in our final report that they were seen in this process and thought about and taken into account. And I think that's important, not only for the current residents of the city, but also for the future, any future redistricting committee to be reminded to pay attention to the Latino community in Half Moon Bay. I had one other thing that maybe is best done in written form, but and it gets a bit wonky. I mean, this is right up Shalice's alley, but I did do a little bit of homework on the census blocks issue. So just to remind everybody, we identified two problems with map drawing in Half Moon Bay. One is there's some islands that cannot be separated from the block that includes them, and that caused some problems in map drawing. Another problem that we've encountered were big blocks, either in area or in population, that in practice made it quite difficult to preserve communities of interest and be flexible about drawing maps. And at the time, we sort of lamented that there wasn't much we could do about it, but we did say that perhaps it was worth the city exploring a petition to the Census Bureau to split these big blocks up especially for small jurisdictions like Half Moon Bay, so that it's easier for the next redistricting committee to draw maps that preserve communities of interest. And I'd be happy to share my notes with Shalice on which blocks I think would benefit from being split up. I think it's worth commenting on that in the report.
Okay, thanks very much, Phil. Steve.
Once again, thank you, Phil, for those thoughtful comments. I remember that I was both impressed and disappointed from the standpoint of the Latino voting population within Half Moon Bay. I was impressed with the level of outreach that the city, Jessica, you and your colleagues have done to make sure that there are Spanish interpreters and that all of the, all the relevant documentation was translated into Spanish, and there was outreach made to the Spanish-speaking community. But I was also disappointed that we weren't able to drum up, really much of anything in the way other than sort of proxy comments by people, including a number of members of this committee who, sort of spoke out on behalf of the Latino population. And I think that, a responsibility of this city moving forward, and I think a big step has been the election of our first Latino city council member. But I think this community needs to continue to try to build bridges and really make efforts to bring those folks into the political fold, because it will benefit all of us to do so and more appropriately represent the needs and the desires of the city. And I think I echo what Phil said, that I think we need to make sure that that's part of the final report, because we don't want to have, somebody in arrears say, well, why were there no Spanish voices heard during this process? And so I think that should be noted.
Yeah, Paul, perhaps I can just respond.
Yeah, go ahead, Phil. Yeah, sure.
I mean, I agree with that, Steve. I think, but I think the civic engagement by the Latino community is a long-term project, and the best thing we can do is be strong allies for them. To recognize that their representation is important. I did actually report, it lost in a flood of public comments, but I did report one public comment that I received from Belinda Arriaga, one of the leaders of the Latino community in town. And she just left a very brief comment, but it was along the lines of her view that the 5-district system was more equitable than the 4-district system, in that it spread the power and the ideas more broadly. It encouraged the council to work together in a way that an elected mayor wouldn't, and that she recommended the 5-district system. And I was pleased that that came through in our final recommendation.
Good to know. Thanks. Did you have more to say, Steve, or your hand just left hanging up there? Okay. Jessica, do we need to have some kind of a motion to set up this? Oh, Michael, you want to say something? Sorry. Michael, go ahead. You may be muted.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I had trouble getting off my mute. The other thing I would like to have in the report is the efforts that was made for the outreach. And in addition to the outreach, going to the library and going to the farmers market, I also thought it was a great idea when I met the staff at the library. I wasn't expecting this. There was actually Half Moon Bay staffers there that were not part of this process. And I thought that was a real good inclusion to have people that, are working for the city. They're out, they're answering questions, because some people just ask questions that weren't even about redistricting, but obviously it was just very important to have the visibility. So the idea of going forth to have that kind of outreach with the community where they see the staffers that are working on their behalf, I just think it's really a good idea, and I would just like to have that cited.
Okay, I've noted that, Michael. Thank you. I'm just going to go back to Jessica again. Do I need to have a motion to set up a subcommittee, Jessica?
Yeah, we would need a motion and a second and then a vote. And so whoever makes the motion, it would be appropriate to say, move to appoint a subcommittee to finalize the committee's recommendation for the city council staff report and then name the 3 members of that subcommittee.
Okay. I think I can't do that because I'd be one of them.
I would like to move that a subcommittee be founded to finalize the recommendations.
Okay. And would you like to recommend who's on that, Steve?
Yes. Paul Gator and Phil Marshall. And did we say Chair Holt as well?
We did.
Yes, Chair Holt.
Okay.
Is there a second on that motion?
I second that motion.
Thank you. So committee member Marshall, Claudia Marshall,
Yes.
committee member Phil Marshall,
Yes.
committee member Mahler, committee member Settles,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Gator.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Thank you very much. Put that in Jessica's capable hands to organize the 3 of us. I think that concludes the meeting, unless anybody has anything else that they want to bring up. I can't imagine what that might be, but this will be the last meeting officially of this committee. Is that right, Jessica? Unless the council asks us to reconvene for some reason.
Yeah, presumably, yes, but
Yeah.
until this committee will exist until that the second reading of the ordinance is adopted. And yeah, so
Okay, so that's the second ordinance, which is in March.
it would,
Second reading, I mean.
the way it's currently scheduled is the introduction of the ordinance on February 15th, second reading would then be on March 1st.
Okay. Very good. Okay, in that case then I'm going to declare this meeting closed and thank everyone for their participation, including all the members of the public who've spoken. And thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you, Paul. Well done. Thank you, Jessica and Shalice and committee members as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, all of you.
And I'm wondering if I get course credit for this in social studies or government or something like that. So thank you for all of the guidance and knowledge and experience.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.